Hi, I'm Jenny, and my final project is titled Mapping Indonesia's Mega Rice Project, Past and Present Peat Forest Degradation. I'm interested in this area of southern central Kalimantan that is referred to the Mega Rice Project or the X-Mega Rice Project. And what happened here is that in the 90s, the government thought they could increase food security by planting over 1 million hectares of wet cultivated rice. That's over 2 million acres. And the project failed miserably because the area is particularly ill-suited to growing wet rice. And after the forest was cleared and the first season of rice was planted, the peat soils underneath caught fire and were extremely catastrophic. So one of my research questions is whether or not this previously degraded area is increasingly prone to more recent and current forest degradation, and if so, what type of degradation in relation to the rest of the province. So here's a reference map. The shaded area is the boundary of the original Mega Rice project that was planned, and I pulled up some shape files of Kalimantan's roads and was very interested to find out that what are actually canals in the area are, well, in most maps titled roads, but you can see from the perpendicular blue lines that those are dug canals that were built in the 1990s. I guess this is where ground truthing is important because I only know that because I've been there. Whereas most of the brown roads outside the project, I presume, are logging roads or on oil palm plantations, just because they're clustered in that way. You can also see from this digital elevation model that the area is extremely low-lying. Most of it's less than 50 meters in elevation, and if the peat forest is intact, it's generally covered with standing water, maybe like the Florida Everglades. So one of the things I am interested to learn is whether or not this area that was previously degraded might have increased degradation now because of increased access to this particular area, given that a lot of locals and also companies can access this site better than some of the surrounding areas that are very thick if they haven't been developed with infrastructure, whereas the infrastructure in this mega rice area is already there in place to access it. You also might think that an area that was previously degraded might have less degradation now because the trees are gone, so what's left to take? But in fact, this area is particularly interesting because of the peat soils underneath the forest, which, if they're cleared and deforested, can catch on fire, which is also a type of forest degradation. So what I did next was pull up a map of Central Kalimantan Province's peat soils. This was put out by the government and picked up by the World Resources Institute, and I had to convert the raster file to a vector so I could do some spatial queries. And although I know from talking to scientists that this map is not entirely accurate with regards to the actual depth of the peat soils here, we know now that many of the soils are up to 15 meters deep of peat. And peat is really interesting because it's extremely carbon dense, and if it's dry, it can easily catch on fire and will release thousands of tons of carbon dioxide. So they're volatile and they're scary, and scientists are increasingly looking at this area. So I overlaid the shapefile of the Mega Rice project onto this area, and you can see that most of it is over peat, which makes it increasingly vulnerable. Then I pulled up this database, spatial database, called Forma Alerts, which is a new product put out by the World Resources Institute, which basically tracks forest disturbance events across the humid tropics. So I narrowed down the extremely large database to just Central Kalimantan province and found that out of about 400,000 Forma alerts between 2006 and 2013 in Indonesia, roughly 12% of them occurred in Central Kalimantan province. Now, out of those, only 13% were in this X-Mega Rice project area. So it's not actually that much, I guess perhaps what we would expect. But if you actually look at where on peat soils they're occurring, which again are really vulnerable areas, you can see that only about 17% occurred across the province on these peat soils thicker than 3 meters. So 3 meters is considered one of the more critical depths, above which are more likely to catch on fire, below which can be more easily managed. However, almost 60% of the Forma alerts in the Mega Rice project area were on very deep peat, thicker than 3 meters. So then what I wanted to see was, what types of areas, what types of forests are these disturbance events occurring in? Are they occurring in areas that are already slated for development and thus would be considered legal? Or are these forest disturbance events occurring on illegal forests or illegally classified areas? So what I found is that using the Ministry of Forestry's official land classification maps, the black outline is Central Kalimantan, and I grouped them into generally, roughly speaking, convertible production forests or general production forests, which can legally be developed as oil palm plantations or used for timber extraction, versus protected areas or protected forests, which include national parks. So I found that about 13% of these FORMA alerts, the disturbance events, occurred in areas that are probably illegal to be doing any sort of forest disturbance, including parks or natural reserves. However, I found that in the Mega Rice project itself, over 60% of the forest disturbance events occurred on land legally classified as nature reserves or as protection forests. So this is pretty interesting to me because although it doesn't tell us what type of disturbance events they are, it lends itself to wanting to, at least I want to investigate what events these are, because we already know there are not so many trees left, which makes me think that a lot of these disturbance events on deep peat in protected areas are actually fires that need to be controlled in the Mega Rice project. So that concludes my presentation for now, and here's a peaceful peat swamp that was cleared in the 90s, but now is actually quite beautiful in its own way, and what we might look at as a forest disturbance event on the right. Thank you.